Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, kua hui mai nei. There you go. So this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about the Treasury's approach to wellbeing and how it fits within the wider government strategy. So we'll start by talking about the Living Standards Framework, which you may be already familiar with. So the Living Standards Framework is a measurement tool that's based on the OECD's analysis around wellbeing, and government has been working on this since around 2011. Okay. So the framework consists of a number of current and future wellbeing measures, looking at how life is changing over time, how lives differ across different population groups, and whether today's wellbeing is being achieved at the cost of depleting future resources and future wellbeing. So when Treasury talks about wellbeing, what is it that they're referring to? So simply put, it's wellbeing is what makes for a good life, what enables people to live lives of purpose, balance and meaning. So we'll look at some of these measures now. So in the framework, current wellbeing outcomes are categorised into 12 domains or areas of wellbeing. The domains are assessed using indices of both quality of life and material conditions, and most domains have multiple indicators. So some of the domains include civic engagement and governance, and that's measured by looking at things like voter turnout and trust indicators, generalised and institutionalised trust. Cultural identity, this is where it is not necessarily appropriate for New Zealand conditions yet. There's a lot of work to be done around what culture means in a New Zealand context. But this is measured currently by looking at the ability to express identity or be yourself. Environment, it's looking at things like air and water quality. Health, that's mental health, health status, suicide rates, life expectancy. Housing, so quality, suitability and affordability of housing, looking at things like mould, crowding, cost. Income and consumption, it's looking at disposable income, income sufficiency, like whether people have enough money to pay for their material needs. Jobs and earnings, measured by things like employment and unemployment rates and hourly earnings. Knowledge and skills, measured by indicators around educational attainment. This includes secondary and tertiary, and qualifications. Safety, including things like domestic violence, victims of crime and workplace accident rates. Social connections, discrimination, loneliness and social network support. Subjective wellbeing, this is looking at things like general life satisfaction and having a sense of purpose. And time use, there's unpaid and paid work, and also like leisure and personal care. So they're quite broad domains for current wellbeing. Okay, so late last year, the government launched, or Treasury launched, a dashboard to look at current and future wellbeing. This is an indication or example of our people. The two other sections include our country and our future. So our people and our country use the same 12 domains. Our people section uses results from the New Zealand General Social Survey, which is conducted every 2 years with around 8,000 households. And our country uses the same 12 domains, but uses some of the data from government agencies. So there are only 9 indicators in the Our People section so far, which is from the New Zealand Social Survey. There is insufficient data on jobs and earnings, environment and time use. They don't ask these questions, or they don't ask them in a way that's actually meaningful and measurable currently. So it's a work in progress. So the two examples that we've got here, the spider graph on the left looks at population groups and what their likelihood is of having high or low well-being compared to the rest of the general population. The example, the spider graph on the left, is Māori compared to the general population. So the blue points show where the selected population is more or less likely to have high well-being, and yellow shows where they are more or less likely to have low well-being. The black circle is ground zero. This is what the general population well-being is. So we can see from our example that Māori compared to the rest of the population are between 2 and 18 percentage points less likely to have high well-being across all 9 of those domains. So depending on what domain they're looking at. This means that they are more likely than the rest of the population to have low well-being across those domains. And domain comparison is the graph on the right. This graph shows how each domain of current well-being interacts with the other domains. So for example, this is for those aged 35 to 64. And as an example, when income and consumption is high, housing is 22 percentage points more likely to also be high. And when cultural identity is high, subjective well-being is 13 percentage points more likely to be high. So we can see the interrelationship, and it sounds like common sense, right? If you feel good about yourself, then you're more likely to have higher levels of life satisfaction. So as I said before, our country section of the dashboard also looks at those same 12 current wellbeing domains, but it uses other data sets. So for example, it uses Ministry of Environment data sets around water quality for swimmability measures. It uses Electoral Commission data for voter turnout, but it's still measuring those same domains of wellbeing. The last section of the dashboard, Our Future, looks at it uses the 4 capitals as a way of organising indicators of intergenerational wellbeing. So the capitals indicate whether wellbeing is being sustained or improved in terms of these general outcomes. So with the 4 capitals, they're just a way of organising these indicators of future wellbeing. We have natural capitals, so these are all the aspects of the natural environment used to sustain life and human activity. This is looking at our soil, water, plants, minerals and energy resources. Social capital, this is the most under-measured capital. The definition is argued about internationally, and probably nationally as well, but they are the norms and values that underpin society. So for us, it's included around trust, commitment to Crown Māori relationships, cultural identity and social connections between people. Rising inequality between population groups is an indication that social capital is low. So human capital, this is people's skills, knowledge and their physical and mental health. These are the things which enable people to participate fully in work, study, recreational studies and society more broadly. So human capital has a direct link to key wellbeing domains such as jobs and earnings, income and consumption, knowledge and skills and health. And we have lastly financial and physical capital. This is the infrastructure of the country. We're looking at roads, houses, factories, hospitals and other financial assets. These are the human-made things involved in commercial and non-commercial activity. Resilience, digitalisation, the impact of climate change, these are all part of the financial capital equation. So there are synergies and tensions between and within the capitals, and the Living Standards Framework doesn't remove these tensions. However, Treasury argues that it enables a holistic and coherent way of assessing the trade-offs between the capitals. So how does this relate to the budget? So the government approach to wellbeing is broader than the Living Standards Framework. It includes legislative changes like the Child Poverty Reduction Bill, institutional changes such as the Urban Development Agency, and decision-making tools like the upcoming Wellbeing Budget. So in the Budget Policy Statement, which was launched in December last year, the government announced 5 budget priorities for Budget 2019. They cover all of the capitals and most of the domains, in particular health, jobs and earnings, knowledge and skills, safety and subjective wellbeing. So our first priority here is supporting mental wellbeing for all New Zealanders, and for this there's a particular focus for those under 24. So in any 12-month period, about 1 in 5 New Zealanders will have a diagnosable mental illness, with 3/4 of lifetime cases starting before the age of 25. So poor mental health is a barrier to participating in the community, to developing social connections, greater life satisfaction, and there's really strong connections between mental wellbeing and material standards of living. The second priority here is the reduction of child poverty and improving child wellbeing and including addressing family violence. So you may have seen the announcement of a $320 million package over 4 years yesterday. So up to 300,000 children live in poverty or hardship in New Zealand. Poverty early in life has long-term detrimental effects on many areas, including cognitive skills, health and income levels, which are likely to lead to poor life outcomes. So this is our future wellbeing. This suggests improving outcomes for the most worst off, particularly children and their families would have significant benefits. So let's see if further Welfare Advisory Group recommendations are taken up in the budget next week. The third is lifting Māori and Pasifika incomes through skills and opportunities. There are significant disparities in the standards of living of population groups, particularly Māori and Pasifika. The material standards of living for Pasifika people are around half that of the general population, with Māori being around 1/3 lower. So enduring inequities exist across housing, health and employment outcomes, and as we saw before, across domains. Our fourth one is supporting a thriving nation through innovation, social and economic opportunities. So this is around our digital innovation. The rapid pace of technological change and innovation is driving significant change across economies, governments and societies. And we all hear how many of today's jobs are no longer going to exist in the short-term future. But 100,000 New Zealand children, our future workforce, live in households without an internet connection. Rural and low socioeconomic communities, people with disabilities and senior citizens are also at high risk of digital exclusion. So this priority sits in the knowledge and skills domain, as well as in human and social capital. So creating opportunities for productive businesses is our last priority here, with the transition to a low emission economy. So New Zealand has a significant land-based economy, but it's estimated that we lose 192 million tonnes of soil each year through erosion. And land that is eroded or polluted decreases natural capital, can affect health of communities that live in those areas, and it may be difficult to convert to other uses such as housing. So the government has flagged a commitment to a just transition to a low emission economy, and this transition will take time and a lot of resources. It requires long-term planning and a focus on a productive, sustainable and inclusive growth. I was looking forward to seeing what the announcements are in these priority areas next week. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'll hand you over to Nick now, who's going to talk around the current economic outlook. Kia ora.